Welcome to the Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. In this show, we talk to leaders of clubs and interesting folks who live here in the Villages to get perspectives of what is happening here in the Villages, Florida. We are a listener-supported podcast. There will be shout-outs for supporters in episodes.
This is Mike Roth. And listeners, I'm thrilled to share with you this podcast, which is my passion project for you. This podcast brings you knowledge, inspiration, and a lot of things that people need to know about the Villages and the people living here. Be sure to hit the follow button to get the newest episode each week. Creating this podcast is a labor of love, even though it demands more time I can easily spare. Now, here's where you come in. You can help us keep the podcast alive and thriving. How? By becoming a supporter. The easy way for you to support us is to visit our podcast webpage, openforuminthevillagesflorida.com, and click on the supporter button at the top of the page, or the purple supporter box. Even a small donation of $3 to $10 a month makes a big difference, and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Your support means the world to us. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep those headphones on. I hope everyone enjoys today's show. This is Mike Roth on Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. I'm here today with Christine Morris Campbell. Thanks for joining me, Christine.
Thank you.
Before we get started, I just wanted to remind our listeners, if you want to become a follower of the series and be notified when each episode is released, you need to go to openforuminthevillagesflorida.com, and you'll see in the upper right-hand corner the word follow. You want to hit that button so that you'll be automatically notified of future episodes. Christine, I've known you for more than a couple of years now, and I think we've known each other for about 6 years. And I didn't know until recently that you were an author.
I have written 3 books. I write under the title Christine Morris Campbell, Morris being my maiden name, and that's basically how I learned to write. I got my education while I was in England. About 10 years ago, I was studying genealogy, and I found a third great-grandfather in Edinburgh who was a watchmaker, but he was also a thief. And he was sentenced to 7 years transportation to Van Diemen's Land. Van Diemen's Land is what is now known as Tasmania. At the time, I thought it was an interesting story, and we used to go out to dinner with some friends on a Wednesday night, and one of them said, "You should write a book about this." And every week, for 3 weeks, he said, "Have you started your book?" No. The next week, he came with an outline and said, "Here's your outline." I didn't use his outline, but it got me started to write the book. It actually took me a couple of years. My husband was ill, and I abandoned it for a while. And then I decided if I wanted to ever get it published, I needed to get a move on. And I did, and I published it in November of 2016. It's called The Watchmaker, and it's set in Edinburgh between about 1842 and 1850.
Let's go back.
Yes.
You grew up in England. Where?
I was in Yorkshire. I was born and raised in Yorkshire, but I was educated at the University of London. And I never went back home after that. I worked for a company as a personnel director for a department store, and they moved me around several different places in the country.
It's not that department store that we all know the name of in London.
Oh, it was not Harrods. I actually turned down a job at Harrods, and I went for a company called Marks & Spencer, which is a national chain.
Yeah, I've heard of Marks & Spencer. And you graduated with a degree in
German language and literature. Yes, that's unusual. I've never used it apart from when I go back on vacation to Germany. At the time when I graduated, having a degree was the most important thing. There were fewer people in England going to university. It was a somewhat elitist thing, quite honestly, to do. And I had to compete to get in. I guess I got in, but having a degree was what gave me my first job and allowed me to go into a management program.
But why the German language?
Because I was good at it and I liked it. I love the language.
Okay. And you still speak German?
To a degree, yes. It's been a while.
Okay. I lived in Cincinnati for a lot of years, and it was a very German city. And one of my good friends was a former West Germany resident, and she married a fellow who escaped from East Germany. And they were a very interesting couple. And it's very difficult language for me,
Well,
but
I just happen to be good at languages.
I guess so. Now, you've lived in the United States for how long?
I've been here 50 years.
50 years, a long time. And is it that you came to America?
It was back in August of 1973. And if I told you the whole story, I might have to shoot you, Mike. But I was in Russia, and it was during the Cold War days. Quite honestly, I did go there as a tourist. I was interested to see how Russians really were, because they were considered our enemy. And when you saw them on television at the Kremlin, they were always so dour and cold. But their literature and their music is something totally different. So I wanted to know, who is the real Russian? And while I was there, across the breakfast table, I met a very handsome American. And a year later, I ended up marrying him and coming here. It was an adventure, and I like adventures.
So was he a spy?
I can't say what he was doing. He was a U.S. Navy dentist, and he happened to be stationed in Scotland.
Oh, okay. So what was a dentist doing in Russia?
He was curious because he said he had the same kind of curiosity I did, but he thought, well, if the Russians are our enemy, I'd like to know a bit more about them. And so he'd gone there on vacation too.
And when you came back to the United States, where did you live in the United States?
Initially, I lived in Rockville, Maryland. My husband was stationed at the Navy Hospital in Bethesda. And we were only there about a year. Then we lived for 2 years in Southern California. And at that point, I actually pursued being a personnel director again with May Company, which has since gone defunct. But I was the personnel director of May Company in Carlsbad, California.
That another department store?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it was a national chain here. From there, we moved for 4 years to Panama.
Oh, Central America.
So I picked up a bit of Spanish there, and
Que pasa?
a bit more than that.
I don't have much more than that. And in your resume, it says you visited all 50 states in America. How come you did that?
My husband retired early. He retired at 47 the first time. He actually retired 3 times, but we could never quite settle into retirement. But the first 3 years after he retired, we got an RV and we toured around America. And I guess just gradually, we both really loved to travel and we loved to RV. And so I got around a whole lot.
You got to see every state in America.
Yes. Yeah, the last one was North Dakota. And we were in Minnesota for about a month. And actually, I went to North Dakota for lunch. But that was my only exposure to North Dakota. But most places I stayed longer than lunch.
And you went to Hawaii and Alaska.
Yes, we drove a motorhome to Alaska. I've been to Alaska 4 times, but one time we drove the motorhome up there.
How come you came to the Villages?
After my husband passed, I had been here as a snowbird a couple of times. I felt that as a single woman, it was a good place to live, that there were a lot of activities. I actually came for the pickleball and was playing it when I first came 6 days a week. But there are so many activities here that if you get tired of one activity, you can always find something else to do. And that appealed to me.
Okay. And what led you to write your first book?
It was by chance, I think. As a child, I had thought that I would become an author because I was an avid reader. I did win a competition in the Daily Mail, which is a national newspaper in England, when I was 10, writing a short story about my father. But after that was the end of my writing days. When I found this story about my third great-grandfather, I found that I needed to do research on it. One of the things I just really love about historical fiction is that it takes me as long to do the research on it as it does to write it. The writing, in fact, in some ways is the easy part. Unfortunately, I tend to chase rabbits too, so that I will do some research and come up with an interesting story, and that'll move on to another one, and then I think, oh, I'll put that in my novel. And anyway, the first novel came up that way. The second one came out of COVID. I was playing golf every day, but other than that, what do you do? I found a second great-grandfather in my genealogy studies, and he had been a tin miner in Cornwall, which is southwest England.
He had been a what?
A tin miner.
A tin miner.
Oh, yes. Tin mining was very popular in Cornwall, and they were actually very good at it. He decided to come and gold mine in California, in Northern California. And The Cornish miners were very sought after because they knew how to use the latest equipment. They were hardworking. So it was rather interesting because as an immigrant group, when immigrant groups first come to this country, they're usually lower down in their social level. But this wasn't true of the Cornish miners. They were treated with such respect, and they became the sheriff and the mayor and that sort of thing. He actually did very well for about 20 years. He became an underground boss. And I found all this information. It's available in genealogy. And then he killed somebody. So that was my next novel. That was called The Gold Miner.
Okay, see, the underground might mean the mafia. Is that why he went back to England?
I think he did leave in rather a hurry, put it that way. Yes. And then the last one is just one I finished in January this year, and that is called Journey to Exile. And that really came about because I left a cliffhanger in The Watchmaker, the very first novel. And so it goes back to the first novel of Edwin Turner, the watchmaker, who got sentenced to the 7 years transportation to Van Diemen's Land. And Journey to Exile is the ship journey and his arrival in Van Diemen's Land.
Good. Let's take a short break and listen to a Alzheimer's tip from Dr. Craig Curtis.
We now know that Alzheimer's disease starts about 20 years before the symptoms, with the buildup of a toxic protein called amyloid. And so scientists have been on a quest to remove amyloid to see how it affects the disease. The medicine that was recently FDA approved to slow down symptoms in people with Alzheimer's disease memory problems works by removing this substance called amyloid out of the brain. And now we're attempting to use those medicines to actually remove amyloid before someone develops symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss and forgetfulness.
So that's in that 20-year period before the disease is obvious?
That's right. Scientists now call it Alzheimer's pathologic change versus Alzheimer's disease. And we're saving the term Alzheimer's disease for when someone is actually experiencing symptoms due to Alzheimer's disease.
With over 20 years of experience studying brain health, Dr. Curtis's goal is to educate the village's community on how to live a longer, healthier life. To learn more, visit his website, craigcurtismd.com, or call 352-500-5252 to attend a free seminar.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis. Now, Christine, why don't you review for our listeners the names of your 3 books?
Okay, the first one is The Watchmaker. The second one is The Gold Miner. And the last one is Journey to Exile. And they're all available on Amazon. And they go under my writer's name of Christine Morris Campbell.
Okay. So, Christine, is that the right order to read the books in?
They are standalone. You can read them in any order. I would suggest reading The Watchmaker and followed by Journey to Exile. But The Gold Miner is entirely standalone. It has nothing to do with the other 2 books. And in some ways, there's some difference in style between them.
Okay. And because your grandfather went back to England, that's why you were born in England?
I suppose that's why. If you hadn't done that, I would have been a Californian.
Okay. Are your books self-published?
Yes, they are.
Are you happy about the number of copies that each book has sold?
Generally speaking, yes. Truthfully, I'm not a very good saleswoman for my books, but I'm happy with the sales I've made. And I think more than anything, I write for myself. A lot of writers write and they're very happy when they sell the books, and I'm happy when I sell mine. I won't deny that. But really, I frankly write for myself. I get a lot of pleasure out of writing. I get a lot of pleasure out of doing the research. And it transports me into a different world, is the best way I can describe it. Particularly during COVID, when not a whole lot is going on. It was just a great time to immerse myself, frankly, into a different culture. And that's what I do when I write.
How long does it take you to write a book?
From start to finish, about a year.
About a year. And after you finish writing the manuscript, do you have an editor that you send it out to, or do you have friends? How do you do that?
I have some friends read it. I'm actually a pretty good proofreader, I think. So I do a lot of that myself. I had worked years ago in the Pentagon, and I'd worked at 3-star general level. And so I was used to proofreading things for their signature. So I'm pretty good at grammar and spellings.
Mhm.
That sounds conceited, but it's true. But I do turn it over to Sea Hill Press in Leesburg to actually format it and put it together and do my front cover for me.
Yeah. And today you can use an AI to do all of that,
Yes.
probably more economically. What else have you done to promote your books?
I'm always at the book expo every
Mhm.
year in the villages. I make sure that all my friends and Facebook friends know about it. When I'm just generally around the villages and I'm talking, like last night I went to a concert, got talking to a lady in front of me and passed out a couple of my cards because we happened to talk about writing. She was a writer too. And so a lot of it that way. And there is going to be in September a book expo at Mount Dora, and I'll be going there too.
How many book clubs are you a member of?
Just two, Wine and Words and Writers League of the Villages.
And what's the difference between the two?
Writers League will give you general information about how to put a book together. That's the main group of people. There's several hundred people in it, aspiring writers, and some of them have published many books. So there's a lot of experience in it. Wine and Words is a totally different function. It's run by Frank Lancione in the villages, and basically what he does is he interviews the speaker, and they get to talk about the book. He asks about their personal writing experience, what generated the book, that sort of thing. So it's a very casual atmosphere, say, with Wine and Words, but it's a very pleasant one.
Yeah, I didn't see much wine there.
You must have gone on the wrong night.
I must have. I was expecting almost like an open mixer with an open bar and people talking to one another, and then a couple of short talks. But everyone just sat at tables and listened to readings out of books.
Yes, that, and to answer the question, some of the speakers are actually very good speakers and have written very well.
Yeah, but there's two different arts, writing and speaking.
That's true.
And you don't have to be a good speaker to be a good writer. How would you characterize the style that you write in?
I think the thing that I hear as feedback on my books mainly is that the research I've done has been very extensive. And I've got passages in my book about astronomy, about sailing, about watchmaking, and they're in detail. And this gives a truthfulness to the book and an interest. If you have an inquiring mind, you may actually learn something from my books. I've tended to be very accurate. For instance, my two protagonists in The Watchmaker, the church that they attend actually does still stand. And the minister who married them in my book was actually the minister of that church at the time that they got married. When Queen Victoria visited Edinburgh, when the railway station opened, the dates are correct. I feel that the history is good enough to stand on its own. So why create it?
So when you were writing the book about the grandfather who was a gold miner, how did you learn about mining?
There's a whole lot of information out these days on gold mining. And the internet provides me a tremendous lot of information. I'm actually going to go in about a month's time to the mine where he worked.
Really?
Unfortunately, I hadn't done it beforehand. It's called the Empire Mine, and it's now a state park, and you can go inside.
Is that in California?
Yes, just outside of San Francisco. So I'm going to see it.
Have you ever panned for gold?
Yes, I thought it was a rather worthless thing to do, actually. I've done it in Colorado, and I didn't come up with much.
Yeah, I did it in Alaska, and I think I did it in California. And boy, was it cold in Alaska.
It wasn't cold in California, but I'm in Colorado, but it was still
Backbreaking
not very
work.
successful. Yes, it is. Yes, and it's very slow and tedious.
Yeah. So your great-grandfather came to America for the gold rush in 1849.
No, he actually came later. He came in 1965, so that was already, it was well on the way. And at that time, in fact, his mine that he was working for was taken over by a very large company. Initially, they were individually owned. It was eventually taken over. So he kind of missed the boat on it. I suspect what happened was partly his age at the time, but partly a lot of the Cornish men would come back, Cornish miners would go back to England to look for wives because they still wanted to marry women from Cornwall. And they would come back and they'd tell these stories about how much gold that they had mined, how much money they were making. And I suspect that's what made him go out there. Although, in truth, I come from a family who travel a lot. And so it would not be unusual for me to picture one of my ancestors taking an adventure like that for the fun of it.
Your ancestor who got sent to Tasmania. How long did he actually stay after the 7 years sentence?
That I don't know. I think that most of them stayed because, firstly, it offered a better life. For some of them, they actually went to New South Wales. Around Sydney, there was gold mining going on there in the 1860s or so. And so a lot of them wanted to stay on. And in fact, the Australians got pretty unhappy because these new convicts who'd done their time would want to stay on. And they wanted to get to the gold that the Australian settlers were getting. Transportation actually stopped in about 1853, just shortly after my grandfather went there, because the Australians said no more. It's like the Americans said no more after independence. We used to send convicts from Britain to the United States, and once you became a country, you didn't want to see us anymore as convicts.
Yeah, okay, it's sending people to Central America
Exactly.
with indeterminate sentences, yes. You've been in America for over 20 years.
I've been on and off for over 50 years, but I've lived other places. After we finished with Navy life and we had some time off and traveled, we went into private dental practice in Texas, which we did for about 5 years. And my husband went on a mission trip to India. And when he came back, I told him how much it had cost him to do it. And he said, I want to do this all the time. That took a little bit of mind adjustment on my part, but we ended up selling the practice. And the first thing we did, we worked with the Episcopal Church establishing a dental clinic in a place called San Pedro de Macorís, about 50 miles east of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. And that's still running now, but it's staffed by local dentists. So when that job was done, we were asked to go work with an orphanage program in Honduras. And we did that for about another 6 years every winter. And then we drove our motorhome down to Honduras twice because we could generate electricity when we got there. And so we could fill teeth as opposed to take them out. So we did that for a number of years. And that was another time, I guess, we were out of the country for several years, for 6 months a year. And then latterly, what I did for the last farm thing, I taught English at Donetsk Christian University in Ukraine for about 10 months over a 2-year time period back in about 1999.
What city in
2001.
Ukraine was that?
Sorry?
What city in Ukraine?
Donetsk. It was part of what has become the People's Republic of Donetsk. It was taken over in 2014, and the university where I worked was taken over too.
So is that the Crimea?
It's fairly close to it, yes. It's a few hours' drive away. But it's actually only about 30 miles from the Russian border, so it made it a easy target for the Russians.
Okay. And if you were going to give some advice, okay, to a 21-year-old Christine, based on what you know today, what advice would you give her?
I would tell a 21-year-old to seek out the unusual, to seek out adventure, to not let concerns or worries or fears cloud what you want to do. So not to let fear define who you are, to just overcome whatever anxiety you might have or fear about doing something unknown and just go for it. Seize the day, basically.
Good, good. And what's one life lesson that you've learned?
I think that we are, whatever your religious standpoint is, and mine is Christian, but I think that we are put on this earth to take care of each other. I think that is really the most important thing that we have to do. I think we have a personal responsibility for other people. And if we can make somebody else's life easier, I think that's what we need to do.
Good, good. And Christine, if someone wants to ask you a question about your books, how do they do that?
Okay. My email address is Christine Morris Campbell. That's Campbell with a P in it. It often gets missed, at gmail.com.
Good. Anything else you'd like to add about your books?
No, but I do hope that people might like to read them, enjoy them.
People here in the villages, can they find them in Barnes & Noble?
No.
No, have to go online from Amazon
You have to
again.
go online for Amazon. Yeah,
And these are
Amazon doesn't
softcover
allow
books
it.
or hardcover?
They're soft cover, but they're also on Kindle.
Oh, on
So
Kindle.
they're paperback, and they're all on Kindle as well.
Ever thought of putting them out as an Audible book?
I have, but I've dismissed the idea.
Because
I think the return on investment isn't worth it.
people tell me that. The reason I bring it up is because, as it was pointed out to me, there are people who don't read here in the villages, many seniors, their eyesight may be good enough for day-to-day work,
Yeah.
but sitting continuously down and reading a book for 4 or 8 hours might not be possible.
I may need to revisit the idea, Mike.
For me, I like books, but I don't like to sit down and read them. And Mark's book, The Devil's Bookkeeper, okay, I actually read the first volume. I found it to be very difficult to read. And he said, "Oh, Mike, I got 2 more volumes." And I said, "Oh, Mark, don't give them to me because I'm not going to read them." And he said, "Don't worry. If you want, you can get them on Audible." And I bought the books on Audible. And I found it to be astonishingly good.
He's an astonishingly good writer.
He hired a fantastic actor to read his books. There was a one-person read. The actor did at least 3 or 4 different voices. And it turned something that was very difficult for me to handle from or just a physical reading perspective. Nothing wrong with my eyes, but I didn't really want to take the time to read it that way. On the Audible, I could read it driving my car from place to place, working out, walking in the neighborhood. I found it much more relaxing than actually reading it on paper. It was one of those types of books. And there are other books that don't translate well to a Audible format, a book with lots of pictures or tables like Excel charts. They don't translate well, but his works of fiction were translated very well.
I probably need to talk to him about it.
Yeah, he did it in a very economical way for the quality that he got. The quality he got was A+, and he got it for a very reasonable cost. Good. Hey, Christine, thanks again for being on the show with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Remember, our next episode will be released next Friday at 9 a.m. Should you want to become a major supporter of the show or have questions, please contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. This is a shout-out for supporters Tweet Coleman, Ed Williams, Dwayne Romich, Paul Sorgen, and Dr. Craig Curtis at K2 in the Villages. We will be hearing more from Dr. Curtis with short Alzheimer's tips each week. If you know someone who should be on the show, contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. The way our show grows is with your help. Text your friends about this show if you enjoyed listening, or just tell your friends about the show. We thank everyone for listening to the show. The content of the show is copyrighted by Roth Voice 2025. All rights reserved.